Hi, I'm Pamela Fuselli, and you're watching the first in Parachute's digital speaker series on Vision Zero. Parachute is Canada's national charity dedicated to injury prevention. One of our many initiatives includes leading Canada's national conversation on Vision Zero, a road safety approach with a goal of no fatalities or serious injuries on our roads. It is possible. I'd like to thank Desjardins for supporting our Vision Zero work, including this conversation today on safe school zones. The safety of all pedestrians, but particularly vulnerable road users, such as children, must be a priority. The area around their schools is one of the places where children are at risk of injury. Safe school zones are implemented differently in communities, depending on the characteristics of the neighborhood and the issues that have been identified. For example, drivers regularly exceeding the speed limits, or a high number of parents who drive and drop their children off at school. What does a safe school zone look like under the Vision Zero framework? Can it work in your community? Joining me as panelists to explore some of these issues and solutions around collision prevention in school zones are Dr. Linda Rothman, who is a Senior Research Associate in Child Evaluative Studies at the Hospital for Sick Children. Linda's research currently focuses specifically on child pedestrian injury related to school travel and the built environment. Laura Zeglin is a school traffic management facilitator at Green Communities Canada. She is currently the lead facilitator for the Toronto District School Board School Traffic Management Program, which is aligned with the City of Toronto's Vision Zero road safety strategy. Constable Ryan Smith began his career with the Halton Regional Police Service in 2009. In 2016, Constable Smith moved to the Regional Community Mobilization Bureau, which oversees several region-wide community initiatives. Valerie Smith is a concerned parent who often experiences near misses when dropping her daughter off at her Toronto area school. Valerie is also the Director of Solutions at Parachute and oversees all of Parachute's programs, campaigns, and educational courses. Welcome, everyone. So I'm going to start off with a question, Linda, for you, around how does Vision Zero address school safety zones?
So the Vision Zero Road Safety Plan has several different priority areas, of which the school safety zones are one. They also look at pedestrians overall, seniors, and school zones is what we're concerned about today, but that's only one of the areas. One of the challenges that I think was right from the beginning was how to define a school safety zone. There was all sorts of different ideas based on school frontage, school routes. Nobody was really sure exactly where you start your school safety zone. But I think right now they've come to the conclusion that they're going to focus most of their interventions around 150 meters of a school. These interventions, a lot of them are related to the built environment, but there's also educational initiatives and enforcement initiatives, so there's a lot of different professionals working together to try and decide what are the most appropriate interventions for the schools.
And when we talk about built environment, what is the built environment?
So the built environment is anything that we build and change the environment. So there's the natural environment, which is trees and grass, and we can influence that as well. And sometimes that does come under built environment, but what we're really thinking more along the lines are things such as traffic calming and sidewalk infrastructure, different signage, lines, things like that, that we actually influence and make changes to.
So Laura, what would we notice different in a safe school zone versus an area that hasn't been designated as a safe school zone?
I can speak to what's being done in the City of Toronto. This is not necessarily the only thing that would constitute a safe school zone, but I know through the City of Toronto's Vision Zero plan, they've prioritized certain schools because we've got, what is it, like 900 schools across the City of Toronto, across 4 school boards, so it's a lot of schools. So they're starting with certain ones that they're prioritizing based on data. And those ones, they are choosing to put in what they call gateway features around the school. So it's, again, built environment, things like signage, you know, flashing lights to say, hey, you're entering a school zone, watch your speed, school zone sign, so it shows your speed as you drive past it. Stencils painted on the road to say school, so you know when you're entering that frontage around 150 meters from the school site. But it's also building infrastructure for pedestrians as well. So not just for drivers, but also trying to encourage, you know, to make it a safe space for kids who want to walk to school, or for parents who want their kids to be able to walk to school. So things like crosswalks, things like just very obvious pedestrian markings. So they call them zebra crossings. So it's like the white and black markings. So it's like, yes, this is where pedestrians cross. At places where there's signalized intersections, putting longer crossing times and recognizing that kids with their little legs don't maybe get across as quickly as adults. Just things like that. So really addressing, you know, this is a space where there's all sorts of different road users, but particularly knowing that there's children in this space. So, you know, encouraging drivers to slow down and making space for pedestrians as well.
So they really want to make sure that drivers, as they're coming into these areas, know that there's a school in the area, to expect more children, and to provide children with some of those interventions like school crossing or crossing guards or lighting even, that would make their journey to and from school safer.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, in some school zones that I've worked with, it's not obvious at all that it's a school zone. It could be along a busy road, and cars wouldn't actually realize it until they're in front of the school that it is indeed a school. So this definitely helps address that barrier to school zone safety. But also it's just a reminder to parents who already know they're in a school zone that, hey, you know, this is how fast you're going. You should make sure that you're going slow enough to allow yourself reaction time if a child maybe darts out in front of your car, things like that.
So Val, in speaking from a parent's perspective, what are some of the issues that you've seen in and around your school?
Yeah, so just to give some context, my daughter goes to a primary school in West Toronto with about 1,900 students, so it's a fairly large school. There's very limited parking, so there's a street that runs east and west of the school with maybe parking for 30 to 40 cars. And with the very high number of students walking to school and a very high number, high volume of parents driving, it's a bit of a disaster zone. Based on my experience, I've seen a number of near misses. Almost all of them are not the fault of the student or the child, but the negligence of parents who are driving the cars. I think some of the biggest issues I've seen are around double parking. So at my school, as I said, there's an area where you are allowed to park along the road. And what parents do, again, I think the philosophy in a lot of parents' mind is convenience over safety. And what we see is that parents will double park their car, the kids will run out in a hurry, and they're darting in between parked cars to get over safely to the sidewalk. But the problem is with these cars is that the cars that are parked legally are either pulling forward or they're backing into their spot and they simply can't see the children. So very poor decision making on part of the parents. Another big issue, which is very disconcerting, is parents parking right in the middle or in front of the stop signs. It's very clearly marked. It says no parking. There's lots of room that the cars shouldn't be parked there. And so what happens is you get parents pulling around that car, and then they can't see the children crossing. There's zero visibility. So just over the last few months, I've seen 2 to 3 incidents where kids have literally had to jump back because the car did not see them. That's just a few of the issues, but those are the ones I see over and over again.
Yeah, and just to jump in on that point, a lot of what the City of Toronto is doing in terms of its Vision Zero school safety zones, it doesn't really necessarily address parking. It's mostly addressing speed and safe crossings. But part of the problem is that a lot of these schools, particularly older schools, they weren't designed with high traffic volumes in mind. They were designed with, you know, they were neighborhood schools that students were going to be able to walk to school. So they simply can't handle the capacity now of cars coming onto them. So I think an important piece, and it links back to what you were saying, Linda, about education, is educating around the importance and the benefits of active school travel as a viable option, that we don't need to drive our kids to school. You know, there are going to be instances when maybe that's our only option that day, but really trying to be strategic about how we can find workarounds so we're not all jamming into these small spaces that are not designed to accommodate so many cars.
And when we looked, we went into pretty well all the elementary schools across Toronto over a couple of years to do some observations with university students. We looked at all the different driver behaviors, and the one that we saw the most frequently was actually the parents dropping the kids off on the opposite side of the road to the school. And it happened at like 98% of the schools, and kids running across mid-block. So it wasn't even the double parking so much, it was them dropping them on the opposite side. There's also dangerous U-turns, double parking. We saw people stopping where they weren't supposed to and blocking everybody's vision. And it's not even a traffic speed issue. Nobody's going very fast in front of a school. And you know, the whole Vision Zero thing to slow down traffic makes sense a block or two away from the school, not necessarily right in front of schools where the cars are going very slowly because there's so much congestion. So again, you know what Laura's saying, what we want to do to decrease these behaviors is get people out of cars. I mean, that's the bottom line. You get the decreased traffic congestion, you get people out of the cars, it's a much friendlier environment for walking.
So Constable Smith, you've probably seen some of the things that we were hearing about. What's your role as an enforcement agent in the safe school zone?
So I'll touch a little bit on some of the offenses that we kind of target in the school zones. We identify that the moving offenses typically cause the most risk to public safety, whether it be children, the risk of children getting hit. So those moving offenses would be speeding, stop sign enforcement. Also distracted driving is a huge trend now, unfortunately, with the use of cell phones and other communication devices. So when we actually go into the school zones, we target those offenses because we find that that causes the most risk to public safety. From an enforcement standpoint in school zones, we're fortunate as a police service, as an organization, that we put a lot of time and resources into combating these traffic offenses and these infractions by members of the public in school zones. For example, what we do every year is an annual initiative called Project Safe Start, and we do that the week leading up to the start of school and then the first week of the school. And we, officers region-wide, from the top down, from the chief right down to officers in every specialized unit, are actually out on the street addressing these moving offenses, stop sign, distracted driving, and speeding. So the first week's kind of an education piece where we're out there stopping cars, letting them know that we're going to be there, educating drivers about the importance of being safe in school zones so we can protect the kids and the members of the public. And then the second week's more of an enforcement phase where we're actually issuing provincial offense notices for those infractions. And we find that we get the most benefit out of the awareness portion. Education, I think, I'm not sure one of you said, is education is the biggest thing for us as a police service, because we can go out and we can enforce and we can lay tickets and provincial offense notices on these drivers, but ultimately we need to provide them with the knowledge so we can prevent that behavior and prevent a child from being injured. So for example, throughout those 2 weeks last year in 2017 at the beginning of school, our service would have done 2,500 hours of high visibility enforcement in those areas. We also, aside from educating the actual drivers, which is important, we're actually educating the children. And we do that by bringing them here to our safety village and putting them through some education in regards to just pedestrian safety, utilizing crosswalks as opposed to maybe running out in the middle of the street, being aware of bicycle safety, where to operate your bike and what equipment to do safely. And throughout a year, we'll have up to 10,000 students come through our safety village, and we can provide them education as well. So we're not only educating the actual drivers who are out there operating the vehicles, but we're also educating the children so they're more aware as well. And that kind of fits into our service preventative piece when it comes to school zone safety. So
when you do the driver stops and you talk to them about what their infraction is and the education, what do they say to you?
It's usually well received in a school zone because typically members of the public understand the importance of being safe in a school zone. Whether it be speeding, sometimes if you would pull that driver over and you let them know maybe you were going 20 over the speed limit, they understand immediately within a school zone the negative effects that can have on public safety, but specifically children. So most individuals are receptive, especially during the first week as we're educating parents and educating family members who are maybe driving these students to school. It's usually well received, especially because it's been identified in our community as one of our biggest concerns. So everybody kind of takes ownership and a role in that. So,
have you seen any improvements over the years?
I think as this program continues to operate, what we do is kind of put out a media blast that Project Safe Start's starting, and we let members of the public know, and that kind of wakes everybody up at the beginning of the school year and know that, okay, listen, school is back. You can kind of get lost in the summer that there's no kids around, and you can go through those school zones and you don't have to be as alert. But we are seeing an improvement overall in the amount of collisions and the infractions in the school zones. But again, it's a work in progress. Although we did 2,500 hours of enforcement and high visibility, we also laid close to 2,500 tickets over those 2 weeks. So it's a work in progress. It's something we're working towards. We'd love in a perfect world to be able to go out and be visible and not have to enforce these things and just be present and just as a reminder, but unfortunately it's something that we're constantly working towards.
So Laura, we talked a bit about education, as in informing the drivers and teaching school children and that. But let me shift the discussion a little bit to the role of education itself. So what role does the school, the principals, the teachers, those involved in the proper education of the children who are coming to and from the school?
Well, I wouldn't say what the police are doing is not proper education. But yeah, there's a huge role that schools can play. So in terms of my work, so as a school traffic management facilitator, we help schools come up with action plans that have action items across what we call the 5 E's. So evaluation, enforcement, engineering, so we've spoken to some of these pieces, but then also education and encouragement. And we really encourage the schools to be the ones to take the lead on the education and encouragement pieces. So by encouragement, I mean encouragement of active school travel. So trying to get kids and parents and families excited about that as an option and trying to kind of shift the culture away from a very driving-centric culture that we see at some schools and celebrating those who do walk already. But the education piece, it's kind of twofold, I guess. So, I mean, teachers can address it in the classroom. There's more and more is coming out in terms of curriculum that's available, where they can actually link it in with what they're teaching in the curriculum and have information about not just road safety, but about, you know, the environmental impacts of different modes of travel, how different modes of travel impact, you know, links to the social sciences, to phys ed and health, all sorts of things. So there's that. There's also the actual skill building around. So, I mean, for example, I'll focus on cycling education. So we talk a lot about walking to school, but sometimes, you know, one of the barriers to walking to school is that people live too far, or it's perceived to be too far, it takes too long. So cycling is actually about 3 to 4 times faster than walking, but we, of course, don't want to send kids out on their bikes if they don't have the proper skills. They might physically know how to ride a bike, but then knowing how to navigate the rules of the road is a whole different thing. So I think education, I would love to see it as a standard part of the phys ed curriculum where kids learn how to ride a bike and they learn the rules of the road, because I think that's an important life skill. So that's one piece for education. Just outreach to parents home, not just about, you know, the benefits of active school travel, but also about the importance of it towards safety of the school zone itself. And yeah, just really trying to get the message out to the school community in terms of, you know, hey, we are a school that supports active school travel. These are the things that we're doing, and this is how you could be part of it as well. I think it's really important to engage the students as well as the parents in that education.
So Val, talking about concerned parents and even administrators, you know, what are some of the first steps? Have you seen in your daughter's school area any steps being taken to try to address some of the issues that you raised?
Yeah, our school has been pretty proactive in terms of what they've done. I had a discussion with the principal just last week. So with we do have a very engaged parent group called the Safe School Committee, and these parents are amazing. There's a strong leader at the front of that group. They've recently engaged the local counselor, and over in the last 6 months, the speed reduction has gone from 40 to 30. And Linda, you mentioned there's not a lot of schools that have fast-moving roads around them. My daughter's school is bordered by one very busy road, so the speed reduction has significantly helped. With that, they have the big warning sign that lets parents know, lets drivers know how fast they're going into the school zone. The school's also had 4 crossing guards placed in 4 key areas, and while I understand that the jury is still out around evidence of the effectiveness of crossing guards, based on my experience both as someone who did walk their child to school and now has to drive their child to school, I think the crossing guards are doing amazing work, and everything I have seen is positive in terms of their impact on both drivers and children. So yeah, so we're doing some good stuff. There's definitely more to be done. But I think we're taking the measures we can. As I said, physically the space is limited in terms of making room for more drivers. And while I understand that we want to reduce the number of drivers driving their children to school, we are in a society as well where people are favoring convenience. And so while we're still in that space, how do we address those drivers that are going to continue to drive their children to school, despite maybe being able to walk 25 minutes instead, then go home, get their car, and go to work?
I'm going to ask you a similar question to what I asked Constable Smith. When you talk to the parents, on that committee and involved, what do they say when you bring up the fact that some of them are the ones that are actually dropping their kids off and having them cross the road or blocking the street sign? I mean, do they know that what they're doing isn't safe, but they put convenience over safety? Is
that's
some
a
of the
hard
conversations?
question to ask. I work in the field of injury prevention, so I'm very aware of my driving behavior in a school zone. I would like to think a lot of the parents aren't actually aware or aren't catching themselves, but the awareness at my daughter's school has grown so much that I feel that parents do recognize how they're behaving. And while some parents are changing their behavior, I also believe some parents, again, are looking to what's the fastest way I'm going to get my kid dropped off and get on their way to work. I've actually knocked on the windows of cars to ask people to move, and in some cases I've been completely ignored and dismissed. So again, every parent is different, every school is different. Our school, in terms of education, has been very proactive at trying to raise awareness amongst parents. So while we do our work with our students, in our school newsletter, at least monthly, we see notes out to the parents reminding them of proper driving behaviors. And I like that it's aimed at parents because, as I said, I think parents are the ones causing many of the challenges that we see around our school zones.
So Linda, let me talk a little bit about some of the work that you've done, some of the research you've done. I know that involved the sort of kiss and ride, the drop-off issues. What are you seeing in terms of effective interventions? I mean, do the speed signs that flash how fast you're going, are they effective? Are there other recommendations that are coming out of your research, or is it a bit too early to tell at this point?
We are planning to be doing more evaluations of very specific things like the sign flashing. We've done, not specific to school zones, but we looked at effectiveness of traffic calming, speed humps, and it's got a huge effect on reducing collisions across the board, all ages, kids, adults. So anything to do with traffic calming, as far as I'm concerned, is a great thing. The designated drop-off areas do tend to help reduce some of the bad driving behaviors around school. I'm not I'm a proponent of designated drop-off areas because they're good for the people who have to drive, but I'd much rather see no designated drop-off and nobody driving their kids to school. There's alternative solutions. I mean, we talk about the possibility of bringing your child to school 3 blocks away and walking a couple blocks, and in that way it decreases the collision, the area, the congestion around the area. There are different municipalities that actually have drop-off areas like a few blocks away from the schools. So that's one possibility schools can look at. Again, what we want to do is reduce the congestion around the schools. The other thing that concerns me that keeps coming back up over and over and over again in all of our research, and I think it's a good thing everybody to be aware of, is there's huge differences by socioeconomic status in the city. So kids who come from lower socioeconomic areas and whose schools are in lower socioeconomic areas are more at risk of collision. And it's not just collisions, it's any injury, as you know from parachute. And you know, people say, oh, kids who are from lower income areas walk more to school. That's not the case actually in Toronto. We have not found that, because in Toronto you've got the downtown core, which has a lot of very wealthy areas that 98% of kids walk to school. Some of the suburban areas that are lower income, there's a lot of people driving their cars in older secondhand cars. So we don't actually see that walking gradient as much in Toronto as you might see in some of the cities in the States. So it's not an exposure issue. It's not more poor kids walk to school, that's not it. And maybe some more of them are unaccompanied by adults. That's a possibility. But even when we control for the number of kids walking, we still see that there's higher collision rates in lower income areas. So our newest research is looking at the built environment in high income areas and low income areas related to safety. Preliminary results is more traffic calming in richer areas. Mm-hmm. Why is that? I think it's because it's request driven. Who's going to ask for it? The people who have the good connections with, you know, with politicians and people who are like politically astute. And we've seen there are some strong gradients towards better traffic features in higher income areas. And I really want to make sure that this school zone safety program, we talk a lot about this, is equal across the city. Like the interventions are going to be getting in every area by need, not by who cries the loudest for the intervention.
So that speaks to some of that data-driven decision making, if you will, by collisions, by type of collisions, by the number of vulnerable road users that are being affected, that kind of thing.
And that's when Laura was talking about the priority. We all sat down as a group and we were trying to figure out what combination of factors do we want to make it so in terms of priority, which schools get the interventions first. We initially started talking about lower income areas, but then we actually switched to the KSI, the killed and severely injured, which kind of covers the lower income areas. They overlap a lot. A third of it was that, a third of it was other collisions, and a third was the proportion of kids who could walk to school within 1.6 kilometers of the school. So that's how they actually put together their priority list. You know, there's been but there's also schools that have had to have interventions quickly because of horrible incidents happening nearby. So, anyways, it's all it's very data driven, and part of the data driven, which we can talk about a little bit later, is also evaluation of all this stuff.
And is it true that the more pedestrians that are out on the road, or not on the road, I guess, but you know, out walking, that it actually increases the safety of those pedestrians?
So there has been a lot of work years ago called safety in numbers. So the more pedestrians out there, the safer it is for them. When we look at kids, that doesn't actually work all that well. Those surveys were all done with adults, and it was work travel surveys and things like that. And what we talk a lot about is this curve. You know, there's more kids walking. You get to a point where it tips over until it's safer, but until that point, more kids walking may end up with a few more collisions until you get to the safety point, and then it tips over onto the other side. What we find is, or what we found with our research, is that the more kids walking to school was related to more collisions, but then when we started looking at the built environment, as soon as you put good built environment features in, that relationship disappears. So walking to school does not need to be related to more collisions if the environment's safe.
But you have to understand the holistic approach, that you can't just do one thing, that you have to take a look at what encourages. It's almost the chicken and the egg. You have the safer environment, more people feel safe walking, but you need more people walking to actually get those safe environments, right? Yeah.
And the other thing that, I mean, Vision Zero right now, and Laura and I are involved in another project, but right now, Vision Zero, the road safety, the school zone safety, is very focused right in front of the school. A lot of our stuff has shown that that's not really what the parents are concerned about, it's actually the route. Mm-hmm. So Vision Zero will have to eventually start, and they are starting to look at beyond the school zone, because that's not really what a lot of parents are concerned about. They're concerned about a kilometer down the road where there's a lot of high-speed traffic, and that's how they make their decisions about walking their kids. Not in front of the school. So we have to keep that in mind. Whatever they're doing around the school is great, but it may not be the 100% solution.
That's interesting you say that, because that's one strategy that we'll use when we are doing traffic enforcement in a school area, is it won't be necessarily right in front of the school, because that's typically where the parents and the motorists are most in tune of what's going on. So we will do that a kilometer up the road leading into that school zone, because sometimes that has the most effect, right? And even you said something about, I think, parents or community stakeholders raising awareness in regards to the concerns. We also get those complaints from members of the public in regards to specific school zones. So as a concerned parent, that's an option to reach out to the police in that area. We'll sometimes do mini projects outside of our Safe Start, addressing a specific school zone if we get a number of complaints from concerned parents. And it could be as easy as putting a marked police vehicle at the front of a school zone so you're visible, and that can deter the dangerous driving offenses, even that. So as a parent, as school administrators, it's often we're getting calls and complaints to address those moving offenses or different types of offenses, parking in school zones. So.
Yeah. On that note, just recently the Safe School Committee did contact police and ticketing, and on the days that police were there, I thought it was amazing. The immediate impact upon drivers is astounding. And the police weren't necessarily ticketing, they were talking to the drivers, and they were giving some fairly stern guidance in terms of how drivers should be behaving. But we also do have parked police cars in some of the crossing guard areas, and I think that's also, it isn't necessarily long-term. Police don't necessarily have the capacity to always be there, but I do think sporadically having that enforcement angle just really supports that multi-integrated approach.
You need a decoy police car that just stays there all the time.
But it has to move locations. But otherwise people get
smart.
They'll know that there's.
I was at a school a couple of years ago who the principal said to me, "Watch what happens." So I went outside and there was a car parked in the middle of the crosswalk and there were people not stopping at the stop sign, and he walked out, he was a big guy, walked out right in front of the school, and everybody started behaving immediately. And he goes, "And watch what happens when I walk back in." And he walked in and all chaos came back. He goes, "I can't keep walking in and out, but this is like, but you have to figure out a way to make it last.
Longer term. Yeah, and some of that automated speed enforcement that they're talking about, you know, can make it so that people are anticipating that they know that if they do speed or they don't stop at the stop sign, that they will be recorded and caught, if you will. That probably doesn't have the same impact as a police car or a principal going out there, but there's that expectation that in this area I will be caught if I do speed or not stop at speed at the stop signs or things. Yeah,
especially
like that.
Especially if you don't know exactly where the automated enforcement is. You have to be careful the whole way. Or if it is even running. So
But we also found that schools where there were school crossing guards, people weren't texting and driving as much. So all it needed was one adult there with some type of uniform on, and the phones went down. So they weren't doing anything about it. It was just the person that was watching.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that in my work with schools as well. Just it's a very common refrain that people say, you know, as soon as the police are there, people behave, but as soon as they leave, they revert back to the behaviors. Well, the vice principal or the principal is out directing traffic, they're better behaved, and as soon as they're not there. So the role of enforcement really is important.
And that expectation of getting caught.
I mean, it's too bad that we need that, but it's true. It's an important
behavior.
Piece of the puzzle. So
Laura, I really like, you know, when we looked at Vision Zero, and some of the components that the framework brings into play, we were also looking at some of the other sectors, if you will, like the environment, like the physical activity groups that were calling for very similar things like increased bike lanes or access to cycling and walking and increasing pedestrians, and that shared agenda, if you will, wanting maybe for different reasons and maybe different goals, although some of them are also shared, but driving and joining forces for this kind of initiative, I think, is really important. How do you see the Safe School or the Safe Routes to School supporting or integrating with the road safety agenda?
Oh, they fit so nicely together. So one thing I'll say, so before Vision Zero officially launched in Toronto, I was working as a school travel planner in Toronto. So essentially the same thing I'm doing now, it just was called something different. Instead of school traffic management, it was school travel planning. But again, it focused on those 5 E's. And what I would do is help convene a committee, a school travel planning committee at each school. And an important part of the evaluation at the beginning of that committee getting together would be a neighborhood walkabout. So we'd bring members of the school community, so parents, students, staff at the school, but also people from outside of the school who had some sort of a stake or decision-making power around the built environment. So this is just speaking to the built environment, but you know, we'd bring along public health nurses because they could also speak to the education and outreach to community members, traffic engineers, police, and often the local city councilor as well, because we spoke about, you know, having the political acumen to get things put in place. It's really important to have your local representatives to be on board with it as well. And anyways, the whole point of the walkabout was that it was an opportunity to, like, we'd go along a predetermined route that was based on my earlier conversations with members of the school community, but what their areas of concern were in the built environment, not just directly in front of the school, but wider out from the school as well. But then it was an opportunity for a two-way dialogue between those with the power to make decisions about what's happening and those, you know, affected every day by what the built environment had in store for them. So it was a good way to get the conversation going. But what was always the biggest struggle with that approach was that the individual stakeholders that we invited along, you know, they may have personally agreed with it. The police officers, like, oh yeah, you know, we can try to get some more enforcement, but it was always so site specific. It was very labor intensive to do one school at a time. And ultimately, sometimes change is really slow and hard to bring about in terms of saying, hey, we really want a pedestrian crossover here. Oh, well, your school doesn't meet the warrants because there's not enough kids crossing at this location, or there's not enough money in the budget, whatever it might be. It's just a very slow process. But now with Vision Zero, everybody kind of has a stake in the game, right? So different departments across the city of Toronto are now looking through this shared lens of, you know, pedestrian safety, not just pedestrians, but vulnerable road users in general, and school children are among those groups. So they've all got their mandates that have some sort of role that fits in with the sort of work that I'm doing with schools through the school traffic management program that's now for the first time supported by the Toronto District School Board. So that's the biggest school board in Toronto, officially supporting this program in its schools. So it makes such a huge difference in terms of the partnerships, and like you said, we're all on the same page in terms of what we're working towards, and it's really great because, say, Toronto Police, in one division we did a really cool initiative. We had this thing called the fake ticket program that we really like, where the cops will go out with a class of, say, grade 5 or 6 students with the radar gun in a place that they know people often speed, and if someone is caught speeding, so the kids get to catch them on the radar gun, police officer pulls them over, says, hey, you were speeding, you have the choice right now between getting a ticket or hearing from this child. And the child has a little speech prepared about, you know, how speeding has put them at risk and why they shouldn't speed. So people always pick the speech, no one wants a ticket. But you see, like, just like huge smile on the driver's face. It's obviously a story that now they're gonna go tell other people about. They're gonna remember that when they drive along that stretch in the future. So it's very positive, but up until this point, it's been very disjointed among the different units across the city because all the different police divisions are independent. Like they are all run by Toronto Police Services, but they kind of do their own thing to some extent. So now, you know, we've been speaking with, you know, people at the top affiliated with Vision Zero saying, is this a program that we can make available to all divisions across the city? So just helping to standardize stuff like that. And that's just one example. So definitely Vision Zero and, you know, the work that schools can do as part of their community, like huge benefit for these things to be happening at the same time now. Yeah.
We have a few minutes left. You talked, you mentioned a little bit a few minutes ago about evaluation, and I'm going to ask each of you a similar kind of question around, you know, what would be the evaluation that you would like to see or is happening in your area. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about some of that evaluation you're involved with, Linda.
We've got a committee, I guess it is, formed under City Toronto Transportation Services, and Laura's on it. And we have Toronto Police Services and the TDSB and Toronto Public Health, and myself, and I think that's it for now. And what we've been trying to do, and it's been a really fascinating exercise, I think, is trying to work together as researchers and as knowledge users and as policymakers and try and figure out how we're going to evaluate all of this. It's great that we're doing all of it. Does any of it work? Who actually knows, right? And how do you measure it? Collisions are luckily rare events, so it's kind of hard to say like that those 3 collisions that happened this year wouldn't have happened if we did this, this, and this. So we've been designing an evaluation plan that we're supposed to be starting this spring. And what we were doing is we're going to go in as part of another project that we're doing, a bigger cross-Canada project. We're going to go in and do our observations at school. So we're sending out to 75 Toronto schools, 75 Peel schools actually, and we're sending out university students to count the number of people walking, the kids walking to school, the dangerous driving behaviors, vehicle speeds, and volumes. And we're going to look at before they put in the interventions, and post after they put in their interventions, and see if there's differences. And it's a very complicated design because every week, depending on what's happening politically in the city, they add on a few more schools. And we're like, oh no, we don't have pre-data on those. But we're trying really hard to figure out very unique ways to design non-traditional evaluation studies sometimes, and we're also going to compare them to control groups that haven't had any interventions. So if we don't have before data on some of them, we may just be able to compare them to other schools that are similar. So we're going to be doing that over the next 2 years with all these schools that they're putting the interventions in. And again, we're going to be looking at proportions of kids walking, driver behaviors, vehicle speeds, vehicle volumes, and those are the outcomes that we're going to be looking at. And we've all been working really hard on trying to figure out how to do this. I think it's essential. Like, you can keep talking about Vision Zero doing this, 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 and this. Maybe we're not decreasing collisions, but we've increased walking 100%. That's a decrease in collisions per person walking. So you need to know what you're measuring. Right. And that's where I think like the academics, like we have academics working from, well, Sick Kids and York University, University of Toronto, Mississauga, all together with the city and with all the other knowledge users to develop these programs, evaluation programs.
Super.
Yeah.
So stay tuned, 2 years.
Yeah.
Laura? Obviously, you'd like to see more kids walking to school, but what, in your mind, when you think about evaluation or measurement about successes, are there ongoing activities in this area or things that you would like to see put in place?
I'm just going to follow Linda's evaluation and
it works.
Yeah, I mean, at all the schools that I work with as a school traffic management facilitator, we do student travel surveys as part of it, just to get a proportionate idea of how many kids are walking or biking or being driven to school. So it's just a pretty crude hands up survey. So put your hand up if you walked to school today. Put your hand up if you took the school bus to school today, and we do it every day over the course of 1 week, and we try to do it at various points. So with all the schools I'm working with, we did a baseline, then we're going to do one in May, one next October, one next May. It's good to try to keep it at, you know, similar weather times of year, so you don't have the fact that it was a snowstorm impacting how kids are getting to school. Again, it's a relatively crude measurement, but the proportions tend to make sense. They tend to align with you know, the sort of traffic that you see at the school site anyways. So that's the sort of evaluation I'm doing. I'd like to see that being more, like right now we just have a paper-based survey, so I'd like to see that be more automated, more easily available online, and something that could actually be collected at schools, not just the schools that I'm working with, but really across the province or even more broadly, to give us an idea of travel trends over time. Because right now it's really hard to know. We just sort of know based on, oh, there's a lot of traffic, there must be a lot of people driving at this school. So.
Right, right. Constable Smith, you talked about, you know, the number of tickets that you put out and the number of stops you did. What kind of evaluation or measurements are you doing around safe school zones?
Yeah, so one of the things we rely heavily on is something that we call our police analytics, and this lets us pull region-wide data in regards to motor vehicle collisions, maybe any pedestrian collisions. So we can actually target those specific areas within school zones, but also outside of school zones. So if we identify that there's a significant amount of collisions in one area, that's where we'll tackle our enforcement, as opposed to maybe conducting enforcement in an area where there's no collisions. So we need to identify areas that has the most impact on overall public safety. So that's something that we do. We identify those areas. We also identify areas that, like we said, school zones with kids and significant amount of pedestrians will tackle enforcement and education in those areas as well.
And obviously you have those analytics over time, so you can see the trend.
Yeah, so we can pull that at any time, and typically our traffic service sergeants or our district response units who specialize in traffic enforcement are constantly getting that information from our analysts. So if they identify there's a significant number of collisions in an area, chances are you're going to see officers there conducting traffic enforcement and education. So, yeah.
So Val, I know you're not involved directly with your school evaluation, but does the school have some measurements of targets or things that they'd like to see over the next year or so?
I can't answer that. What I do know is that they want continuity in terms of the interventions they have started. So sometimes we find that interventions start and then they're pulled a few months later. So I think I can't speak for the school, but I think as a parent, a measure of success for me would be to see that continuity. You know, let's continue with those 4 crossing guards. Let's continue having the police present, the ticketing enforcement, and I'd love to see, as Laura and Linda pointed out, less people driving. Definitely, I think encouraging the idea of parking further away. I drive because otherwise it'd probably be a 45 to 50-minute walk for me, but I could park further away and walk up. And I think other parents could be encouraged to do that. So I think the more we can come back to that multifaceted approach, how do we attack this at all sorts of different levels? And ideally, I'd like to see a lot less near misses than what I see as an everyday observer.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us for this first digital speaker series on Vision Zero. It was really informative and interesting, and I really want to thank you for coming out and sharing your thoughts and your experiences. And I would encourage all of the viewers if you want more information, to check out Parachute's website at parachutecanada.org. Find out lots of information about Vision Zero and all of the different aspects of the approach to road safety, including safe school zones.